Good afternoon, everyone, or morning, or whatever time of day it is in whatever part of the world you're in. Welcome to our 2021 webinar series. This is the Division 34 of the American Psychological Association, the Society for Environmental, Population, and Conservation Psychology. My name is Daniel Benkendorf, and I'm the current president for Division 34 for the Society. And I'm pleased to host the webinars this year. For March, we're very excited to have our guests here with us today. The title for the presentation today is Playing to Plan, Sparking the Creative Mind in Community Engagement. And we have James Rojas of Place It and John Kamp of Prairie Form here to speak to us today about their work. And just to get us started, I will do a bit of a brief intro for each of them, and then I'll let them take it from there. All right, so James Rojas is an urban planner, community activist, and artist. He has developed an innovative public engagement and community visioning method that uses art making as its medium. And through this method, he has engaged thousands of people by facilitating over 400 workshops and building over 50 interactive models around the world, from the streets of New York and San Francisco to Mexico, Canada, Europe, and South America. He's collaborated with municipalities, nonprofits, community groups, educational institutions, and museums to engage, educate, and empower the public on transportation, housing, open space, and health issues. Rojas is also one of the few nationally recognized urban planners to examine U.S. Latino cultural influences on urban design and sustainability. He has written and lectured extensively on how culture and immigration are transforming the American front yard and landscape. He's the founder of the Latino Urban Forum, an advocacy group dedicated to increasing awareness around urban planning and design issues facing low-income Latinos. Rojas has lectured and facilitated workshops at MIT, Berkeley, Harvard, Cornell, and many other colleges and universities. His installation work has been shown at the Lost Museum of Contemporary Art, the Institute of Contemporary Art Boston, the Venice Biennial, the Exploratorium, the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, the Bronx Museum of Art, and the Getty. His research has appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Dwell, Places, and in many other books. His collaborator, John Kamp, is an urban and landscape designer, educator, facilitator, and licensed landscape contractor. He has a degree from Wesleyan University and holds his master's in urban planning and design from UCLA. And he has over 15 years of experience in the design and installation of irrigation-free landscapes. He's the creator of the first irrigation-free landscape in the state of Minnesota. His writing and illustrating of design guidelines includes the small lot design guidelines for the city of Los Angeles, work in urban tree canopy restoration, and the design of walkable neighborhoods. He's an experienced facilitator who has helped lead numerous workshops through Place It, conducted trainings on water conservation and irrigation-free landscaping, and has worked extensively with immigrant youth in the San Francisco Bay Area. He's multilingual, fluent in both French and Spanish in addition to English, and he also speaks Swedish. He has worked with a diverse range of public and private clients on landscape and urban design projects, large and small, in places such as Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Jose, Minneapolis, and St. Paul. So I welcome them both to our webinar series, and I will turn it over to you guys.
Thanks, Daniel. We'll swap screen shares right now. We'll pull up ours. Let me just bring this to the first side, and we'll go from there. Great. So as Daniel said, the name of our presentation today is called Playing to Plan, Sparking the Creative Mind and Community Engagement. And what we're going to look at is how you can change outcomes in community engagement by engaging people through their hands and their senses. I wanted to thank you guys for having us. We really appreciate this. We weave a lot of environmental psychology into our work, but we had kind of been doing it without knowing we were doing it. And so we didn't realize until we interviewed some environmental psychologists for our book that we're writing that we had actually just been doing this kind of inadvertently. So it's fun to be able to present this work to an actual audience of environmental psychologists. So what we're trying to do fundamentally in our work, with James's work, my work, and the work we do together is really engage people in the natural world and in cities by way of their hands, their bodies, and their senses. So it's less about engaging them with their head and this kind of rational way of thinking, but really about like this kind of physical sensory way of experiencing the world. So what we're going to talk about today is our backgrounds, and so that we don't make it super boring, we're going to do is actually talk about how our backgrounds led us to this work and the observations that we were making along the way that led us to the work that we're doing now. We'll talk about the different ways of engagement that we started to develop once we had started making these observations, and then new methods of engagement that we've created since then. And then we'll talk about outcomes. Everyone's really interested in this. Of course, we're interested in this because at the end of the day, this is the most important part, really, is like how we change outcomes in planning, in urban design, and transportation, and landscape design to be more inclusive so that everyone's involved and that we get really authentically creative ideas. And we'll talk about that. Then the psychological underpinnings of methods and outcomes. This is interesting to us today because normally we're explaining the psychology to urban planners, for example, but today what we're more so going to do is talk about like what we actually try to explain to urban planners, because this is I think a lot of these things you guys are already just going to know. And then we'll talk about some project profiles and case studies so that you can see how these methods are woven into actual projects. And then we'll have a Q&A. So I'm going to turn it over to James, and he's going to talk about Place It and his background.
Hi, so I'm James Rojas, and Place It actually started when I was 4 years old. I wanted a dollhouse growing up at 4, but I couldn't get one at that time. Boys didn't play with dolls houses, so my grandmother gave me a shoebox of small objects, and I built just a little room from that shoebox. And ever since then, I've been intrigued by space and how things are fit together. So I started building more things out of these objects. Next. So I was born in Los Angeles, Latino, born in LA, and this is kind of my city. And it felt too transactional for me. So it felt kind of lacking in some kind of closeness. So I joined the army, and I went to Europe, and I hung out there for a while. And I really liked that connection to space and how things are really connected to your body physically through your senses. I thought, why can't we have American cities like this? Next. So I came back to MIT and studied city planning. And I looked at it gave me a chance to really look at Latino LA, which I did my research on, and how Latinos create space in LA, kind of how they redefine the city based on relationships. So now I also built some models at the same time. And then I worked at Metro, thinking that was it. I'm a planner now. I finished, but I worked there for a long time, working on East Side Rail projects. But again, working with Latinos in the community, it did really be fulfilling. So what I did is, so I started working, on these projects, and we'd have community meetings with Latinos, and all they would do was nod and shake their head. It wasn't really good engagement, because I knew they had a lot of ideas about how to reshape the city, but they just weren't coming out in our public meetings. So I thought, how can I get Latinos to engage in city planning? So what I did is, at the same time, opened up an art gallery, and learn from artists, how they would engage, people through their artwork, through the senses, through the body, and all the different ways of thinking about the city. So I thought, how can I, the city planner, be like an artist and, engage people? So I started displaying my models at the art gallery, and they were a big hit. So people all of a sudden suddenly realized they can really change cities with, with these objects. They try to think about it in a really different way, which is what planners never thought about doing. So it's really great kind of doing this. This is probably in the early 2000s. And then, so that's when I met John at the gallery, and since then I've done over 1,000 workshops across the US and abroad. It's all different demographics and all different, groups. And what I've learned is that, basically, there's two kinds of planning. There's a planning that comes from the government, for the transportation plan, the housing plan, the general plan. And then there's the planning of everyday people. How do you plan your day? How do you walk on the street? And our work has really targeted second group, the everyday planning of people. So most of our clients are not planners. They're everyday people that have a passion for their neighborhood and want to improve it. So go back to John.
Yeah, so Prairie Forum is my business, and I started this in 2008. And before that, I'd been working as a city planner for the city of Los Angeles. And I left because I had wanted to do something that was more connected to the natural world. But I also had become really saturated by bad community engagement. And by the end of my tenure working for the city, I really felt like community engagement was useless. So some of the things that I observed is that, similar to James, either people didn't talk, or if they did talk, they said the same things. So people would always say, I want more parking. And so I just put this photo in because, like, this is essentially what people said that they wanted. They wanted this in their communities. Even though when we look at this photo, we think like, God, this is horrifying. Like, why would you want this next door to you? But that's what everyone kept saying. Or they said this, I want less traffic. So when we'd ask them, what do you want? Something akin to this was what they thought they wanted. And that was something that would be a benefit to their community. Then when we did these presentations where we thought we were putting a lot of thought and care into them, essentially trying to educate people about different ways of creating cities and experiencing cities, they would still say that they wanted this. And then the other issue too is that the same kinds of people would come to the meetings. So, and this is still true today. So it tends to be people who are educated, they're retired, they have time in their hands. Racially and culturally, they tend to be white, and they tend to be at least middle class or upper middle class. So there really isn't a lot of diversity. So you're getting the same kinds of people coming, and then you're also getting the same kinds of answers. So when I left city planning, I started doing landscape work, and the early work that I did was, it was very much kind of top down because I was doing pretty much everything, and I was exploring ideas that were interesting to me. So I was looking at, how do you merge like a space that's for wildlife and also a space for people? How do you merge like formal and wild? But it was still top down. But one thing that I was noticing while I started doing more work in landscape is that there was really a limited range of people who were participating in landscape and landscape design too. So the folks in this photo, for example, there's nothing wrong with these people, but this is very much the demographic of people who tend to be involved in landscape and landscape design. It's not a particularly diverse group of people. And in some ways very much mirrors the kinds of people who come to community meetings for urban planning. So why do I care about this? Well, I mean, I love the natural world. I want as many people as possible to be curious about the natural world. And through the work that James and I do, we always see that people at the end of the day really care about the natural world. And we also have this kind of pretty serious moment right now. It's kind of an all hands on deck moment with the planet. And a lot of the solutions lie in landscapes. We need a lot of people who are engaged with this. But then our connection to the natural world is at an all-time low. This is a very familiar scene to us at this point. You see this all over where an entire family, they're just staring at their phones. But the issue is not just tech. I mean, that's part of it, but there are some other issues, and some of those lie just in the profession and the practice of landscape design, landscape architecture, and that's that we're really not providing a diverse avenue of ways for people to engage in landscape and landscape creation in the ways that are meaningful and interesting to them. So one option is to get an expensive design degree. This is something that I actually chose not to do. So I have a master's. I was going to get a second master's, but then it was going to be $100,000. So I said, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to start my own business on my own. And that's what I did. And then worked my way up to the point where now I'm a licensed landscape contractor. But this isn't an option for a lot of people to get an expensive design degree that's going to cost over $100,000. You can also go and visit a highly designed landscape that's rooted in spectacle, like the one in this picture. There's nothing wrong with this landscape, but it does perpetuate this notion that you have to go to landscape in order to experience it, as opposed to seeing that landscape is all around us and it's in everyone's neighborhood, no matter what the neighborhood is. You can own a house and hire a designer. At least in California, especially coastal California, this is becoming less and less of an option for a lot of people. And then this has been one of the biggest trends in landscape over the past few years. It's been good in the sense that it's opened up the nursery trade to a lot of new kinds of plants that we didn't have before. But from an engagement perspective, this can be really problematic because it sets a set of rules from the get-go and says you're going to engage with the natural world in this way. There's been a lot of research that's been done on this, especially with immigrant communities, looking at how if you focus on just native plants alone, you really create a lot of barriers to engagement, because these plant communities don't necessarily mean anything to people who have recently immigrated to a country. So this is just a quote. I won't read it, but it's from James Hitchbaum in his book Sowing Beauty, and he designed one of the landscapes in London for the Olympics. So now we're going to move on to, based on all of these observations, what we ended up creating, what we've created along the way. So I'm going to pass it off to James.
Yeah, so this is one of my first workshops I've ever done in 2007 for a group of like at-risk Latina youth, and they were designing a stable for to train their horses. And yeah, I just taken a class at Art Center on design-based learning, where they would teach teachers how to teach English, math, and science through building models. So I thought, well, why can't we teach people how to build cities by building city models? So it just made a lot of sense. So this is the first workshop I've done with the nonprofit group called Taking the Reins. It was 30 Latina youth, and it was really successful. I mean, it was really successful. We got the Latina youth to really engage about these spatial ideas about about city, about the project, about the stable, and how all the spatial arrangements were used. What was interesting is that at this workshop, the ED and the executive director wanted to give all the girls horses to build around, right? So I said no, because I said, so half the girls got horses, half of them didn't. And the ones that got the horses kind of decorated the horses. And the ones that did get the horses got the actual project, the space right. So it made me think about, how objects are really powerful and what they convey as meaning, and how we can communicate with objects. So it's really interesting what they got. And after that, and then again, going back to Latinos and Latinas, and this I was thinking about. So when I work with Latinas, they use their hands. They cook, they garden, they do all these things with their hands. That's what they communicate. So this is working in Port Chester on a form-based zoning code, where I went to the senior center. I just took a bunch of materials and told these women, build your ideal city. And they were in really quickly. They got really excited about it. They turned down their Spanish songs and started building their model cities, for them and their, and their families. And if I would have used a map, they would have walked away from me. But this way, they were really excited, really happy. They were able to express themselves, and for them, this is their thing. So they wanted me to come back afterwards, do more workshops like this. So this has really happened a lot when they get opportunity to work with their hands. They get really happy about it, and it's also really, so that's what makes it, because people always talk about problems, but they always build solutions. This is a good way to kind of think about urban planning and building solutions rather than talking about problems that we're trying to get stuck in. So also these workshops, they create empathy. People start to share stories, and talk about, the common core values. So this is a way to bring bridges together, bring bridges between people, so they can really start to think about, their ideal place. And then so we've been lucky enough to do work all over the country with different groups from LGBT community, Latinos, and working on transportation projects, housing projects. But but what I tell people, especially people that are marginalized, they don't even know about planning, is it starts with their favorite child memory. It starts with that. So we have everybody build their memories as a starting point for their planning process, because that's your DNA for city planning. That moment of happiness is what you're going to look for the rest of your life. And really calling it out and defining it with objects really helps people articulate it. Now people understand that cities are about relationships between objects, things, and other people. And I think that's what's really important to understand, that what we see in the built environment is only half the story. It's the memories that you bring into that space that really kind of fills it up. And there's not very many tools that can kind of capture that. So because so it's this way you get really people thinking really kind of clearly about spaces. So yeah, so people build their memory and they work in teams to build their ideal place together. Because people can negotiate, with objects and space, but you can't really negotiate with words. You can be pro bike or pro car, and that's as far as it goes when you talk. But you build together, you can build something that suits together. And then yeah, so it's again, this is a workshop we're working with Latinas, and they had no idea about city planning, and they told me before the workshop, I'm not an architect, I can't design, I can't design, but after we giving them the right materials, who's kind of right, they were able to design their ideal street with the bike lanes, street vendors, trees, lights, and all these things that any designer would do. But they did it themselves, and they felt so empowered about understanding the design process and the urban planning process that really made a difference in their lives. And we see people 10 years later saying, hey, I did your workshop 10 years ago and now I'm studying urban planning, and now I'm doing this, now I'm doing that. So it's really great. And yeah, so people just have any kind of backgrounds and they kind of work together. Yeah, so the collaboration happens really easily with this method. People get really happy because they realize that in planning there is no right or wrong answer. It's how we all collaborate to create, create a solution. So yeah, and what happens too is that people never talk about, parkings or freeways or houses. It's always for the public good. Okay, so and also I think another thing too is I ask people, after they finish or built their ideal community, now pick a time and date. Pick a time and a day in the future, tell us what you're doing in your ideal model. You walk us through your model, tell us what your everyday routine is, because I want these models to really kind of sit in people's heads and not in some planning document. Then they tell a story about their life in these models. And so now we've been doing a lot of online workshops because of COVID, and it's been really, really popular. I was really hesitant at first, thinking we're very tactile, and we're always face to face, but this is really important for people to talk about their experiences. And I think with really interesting that people bring their actual objects they have from their childhood, the memories of childhood, and so you had really deep discussions about the childhood, and since people are in their safe space at home, they realize that their safe space is formed by all these memories they have around them. And how can we talk about that? And then how can we bring this kind of idea about safety through objects and memory into the public realm? So this is John.
So one of the other methods that we use when we engage people and that we developed eventually was exploring space with our senses. So we realized at some point that we really wanted to be able to bring people out into the spaces that they were talking about and that they were building and responding to. And so this is an example of this. This is called a weed walkabout. So the idea is that we're attuning our senses to the overlooked details of everyday space. So with the weed walkabout, what we're trying to do is explore all the plants that are growing in cracks in sidewalks, in vacant parcels, parkways, all the things that have just sort of planted themselves there. And the photos here are some examples of people doing that. So we document where the plants are, we take photos of them, and then we try to identify what they are. And then we lead people through an exercise where they explore what the stories of these plants are, and then what are the survival mechanisms. Because a lot of these plants are growing in really tough conditions, and so it's really interesting to look at how they're able to actually survive these conditions. And then what is the mix of species that we discover when we do these walkabouts? What does it say about the ecology of a place? Because even a neighborhood really has its own ecology, which also includes the sidewalks and the asphalt and other things that you can see in this photo. And the idea is that, this is nature, it's everyday nature, it has value, and by extension, your neighborhood has value. And if we can connect people to what they know and what's around them, we can spark their interest and their curiosity in nature. So it's kind of the complete opposite of doing outward bound, where you take people out to a wilderness area and have a camp for a week. That very much has value. But we're trying to say, this also has value, and it helps people at the same time get into a sensing state so that they can really notice details that they didn't notice before. So this is a quote from one of the participants. So she said the day felt like it was about community building as much as it was about documenting what we were finding. And she said that afterwards, immediately afterwards, her level of awareness of the plants that were around her had increased sharply. And then this can be a starting point. So when we get people into the sensing state, this can be a starting point for then doing different kinds of design explorations. So this is an example of that. So this is a design that we did in the Presidio in San Francisco. So it was looking at, it's actually an abandoned playground. So the idea was, what if we made a landscape with only plants that were already growing in the abandoned playground? We framed them to kind of celebrate them and let them just take over. So the forms and shapes in here actually frame the plants that were already growing in the space. This is just another view of it. It was a pretty awesome setting. This is another version of that. So this is a proposal for a design project in Belgium. So this is looking at an abandoned industrial site that had been vacant for a really long time. And how could you just use the seed banks that were underneath the asphalt and daylight them, and then the rain would fall on them, and you would create a landscape in that way. And that it could be an ornamental landscape, but it could also be an opportunity for discovery and exploration for student groups and anyone who came by. We also do things where we explore spaces like parking lots with our census. We start with these really kind of unpleasant places, and we have people explore. They find a spot within the space that they like, and they kind of reside there and think about why they like that spot, and then we talk about it. And then, sorry, the slides got a little skipped here. I'll skip back, I apologize for that. And then after that, we'll lead people in a design exercise where they actually build a redesigned version of the parking lots. So this is an example.
Based on their senses.
Yeah. We've translated some of these things into virtual format. So this is a virtual walking tour that we did in Long Beach recently. So I created a video where it showed you how to make your own video for a virtual walking tour and talked about why. And so what we had people do is find a spot in their neighborhood that they love being in. They took a photo or a video of that there telling us why they liked it. They sent them to us, and then we spliced them all together into what we call a virtual walking tour. And like with the explorations of the weeds or the explorations of the parking lots after that, then we did a design exercise where people built their ideal neighborhood. Likewise here, this is for a workshop that I've been doing online on irrigation-free landscapes. So I'm trying to get people into a sensing state about environments. And so I asked people to take a look at photos. This is one of a space where lavender is growing, but I don't tell them that it's lavender. What I want them to do first is just take in the image and figure out, based on the cues that they see, what kind of environment it is. And then from there, we have a discussion and we talk about, okay, if this is the kind of environment it is, what is this plant here? And then most of them by that point will know that it's lavender. And then we talk about what the drought adaptations of that plant are based on everything they can see within it. Again, it's this whole idea of trying to get people into this sensing state. So now James is going to talk about the pop-up model, which is another medium that we use.
Yeah, so I've been using these pop-up models on different sites. This is a pop-up model that I did in Tijuana, Mexico, where the city was trying to build a community center for this colonia on the hillsides. And so I went down one weekend, just built this really simple foam core trough to the motorcycle, the driver bed, and the landscape. We had over 20 people show up, and just had them build their ideal park. What would that ideal park look like? So everybody was building and playing, and we gave the city 10 pages of notes, and now they got a really beautiful community center down there. But this is a way to engage people, in a really creative way. And then, so this is kind of what we did, and so it brought people together, used together. And then this is working in so these models really are, they're colorful, they're bright, they're tactile. So people are just curious about them. If I would have, and they're big enough that people could talk about space, like landscapes and how they feel in it. Because I think there's too many models are either gray or they're too small in scale to really get people to understand, people to really kind of interject their emotions and feelings into them. But this is a way so people can get really creative and think about, and how to change things. The fact that I did a model one time, I've done models where we'll have a survey next to the model, and people build really interesting, creative, interventions on the model, like a beer garden or a fountain or a zoo or something. But then when it comes to the survey, they'll write down more crosswalks, more street trees. So again, the way you conduct your outreach and the tools you use is really going to impact what people are going to say. Because people are going to write about kind of stuff that they expect people to read. But when they use their hands, they get really, really creative about what they want. And so people can just explore and play and just kind of come together and kind of reshape and reimagine what they're going to do. And then what we do, we just document all of the interventions people make, to these models. And then, and so people move around and they dream about their neighborhoods. So this is working at, the city of Eugene, where we're working on this whole, the question was, how do we get Latinos to use more parks in Eugene, Oregon? So we worked in the parks department at the university. And we did a series of workshops, and I built these really simple models. We took them to the local mercado there, and we just stop in there for 2 minutes to tell us about what they thought about. Our kids will start playing with the models. Then the parents would come, but it was a really good way to get people just engaged again, and understanding that you could do this kind of people are just willing to kind of do this kind of information, in any kind of atmosphere, any kind of place. So this stuff has all been made into a document for the city now. So I'm talking about.
Yeah, so a lot of what we do now, so when we're communicating this kind of information and these methods to planners, we end up talking about psychology with them. Part of it is that when we started writing our book, we wanted to know why people ended up being so creative and curious when they were working with their hands, when we were taking them out to explore these spaces. They were coming back and building these models, and they weren't building parking, and they weren't building the things that we kept hearing at community meetings. So we interviewed psychologists who use art therapy in their practice, and they basically said, you're helping people get into states of play, sensing states, and flow states. And these are really what end up fundamentally changing what the outcomes of the engagement are. So when you engage people through talking and through words, through writing, even Post-it notes, that's actually a medium that's become very popular. Okay, well, let's write stuff down on Post-it notes and put it on a wall. You do still tend to get the same results, like James was saying. If it's not parking and less traffic, it's going to be very simple, straightforward things like crosswalks or electric vehicles, but it's not going to be something that really transcends the here and now. So now what we do is we actually communicate these psychological underpinnings of our work to potential clients, especially to cities, because the response that we get a lot of times is, well, isn't this just child's play? Isn't this something that just kids do? And why should we care about this? But this represents a very pervasive attitude that play is not important, that it's not going to lead to interesting outcomes, and then it's not something that adults should actually take part in. It's just something that kids do for fun. But it actually, as we all know, it's a way of learning and exploring the world around us. So we wanted to move on to a couple sample projects to give you a sense of how we weave all of this into all these different methods into a project. So this is California Avenue Bike Ped Underpass in Palo Alto. So what we were trying to do here is find some kind of creative solution or set of solutions to the space, which is a very narrow bike ped underpass underneath the Caltrain tracks in Palo Alto. It was created at a time when not a lot of people rode their bikes, but now tons of people ride their bikes in Palo Alto. In fact, over 50% of students ride their bikes to school in Palo Alto now. So what had been happening is that older users of the space felt kind of threatened by the bicyclists, and the bicyclists who tended to be younger but not completely felt like they were being harassed by the older people. So there was really, it wasn't actually overt conflict in the sense that there was any physical conflict, but it was a perceived conflict in the space. So what we did is we held 2 model building workshops first, one with younger users of the space and one with older users of the space. So this is the one with the younger users of the space first. So we led them through an exercise where they built different spaces with their hands and with found objects. And this is the one with the older folks. Now, this in a typical workshop, community engagement workshop, this is like the demographic of person who would come to a community engagement workshop and really dominate the discussion. But when we use this method of people using found objects to build ideal spaces and everyone's on the same playing field, people who perhaps have like a long-standing history in the community and they feel like, you know, they're really kind of like these beacons of knowledge and power, they're not able to dominate this situation because everyone has to do the same thing, and you're not using words, you're using your hands and you're using found objects. The other thing too is we made sure that what they were building at this point wasn't about the underpass itself. We wanted to really remove them from that space and any of the kind of emotionally charged, the charged emotions that they felt about that space. So the first model building exercise was about building their first memory of a mobility experience. The second one was about building an ideal shared bike ped space. So it wasn't about the underpass itself. Then on a separate date, we brought everyone back together. So the folks from both groups brought them together for the first time. And we did a site-based sensory exploration of the space, and people found a spot within the space that they liked. And then after that, we came back and we did a model building exercise in teams where we had people build their ideal California Avenue underpass. But one thing to point out is that before we started all this, we went over the values that are the core values and themes that had come out of the previous workshop, so people could see that there was a lot of commonality and overlap. And it was cool because there wasn't any conflict, there was no yelling, it was the complete opposite. People were happy, they had a great time, and they came up with really creative ideas for how to redesign the underpass. This is another project that we've done. So as I said, you know, I do work on irrigation-free landscapes. And so what I do is try to engage students and young people in this work. And so this is an exercise where I had people explore drought adaptations with their senses. So I started with this question. When I do this work, I start with this question. So, okay, I know how to make irrigation-free landscapes, but how can we make it so that everyone can be their own expert, including the students in this classroom? So a lot of these kids, this is Abraham Lincoln High School in San Francisco. A lot of these kids live in multifamily housing. They live in pretty urban environments. They most likely don't have their own gardens. They maybe have never gardened in their lives. So if that's the starting point, what do we need to do to get them to the point where they feel like they could create their own irrigation-free landscape? And then also, how do I spark their curiosity in things that can seem very technical, like drought adaptations of plants? And how do I do that through engaging them with their senses? So I just give them like a brief overview of drought adaptations of plants, but then the bulk of the exercise is the sensory-based exercise where we divide them up into groups of 6. Into 6 groups. I have 6 plants. They have numbers on them. They don't know what they are. And then what they do is they use their senses to try to deduce what the drought adaptations of the plants are. So we give them 2 minutes, and then we rotate and they get another plant. And then they use their sight, sense of touch, smell. Some of the plants, I bring in plants that intentionally bring in plants that smell, so that they can see that that's actually an adaptation that's also used, and then we talk about that. And then it's also a way for them to spark that sense and that memory. And then at the end, they share what their guesses are for their drought adaptations. And then by extension, then we also talk about, okay, well, is this a plant that could actually ultimately survive in an unirrigated setting, and why? The cool thing too, this is what the teacher said. So there was one student who, with this exercise and this photo here, who spoke the most. And I just assumed it was a kid who talks a lot. And she said, no, actually that kid never talks. But this exercise it sparked his curiosity. It made him excited. It was hands-on. It was all these things that apparently he loved, and so he talked the entire time. And I thought that was really awesome. I'm going to turn it over to James to talk about this last
Yeah,
project.
so most of the projects I do are people that don't have access to planning. They're kind of underserved. And this is a workshop I did 5 years ago with people with disabilities. The city of Phoenix had just built this new center, a sports center for people with disabilities, and across the street from it was a rail line. Well, there is a rail line, but there was no rail stop. So a lot of the people there, they couldn't access the center, even though by rail because there was no stop there. So we did a workshop where I had, I think, 30 or 50 people with disabilities come in. I told them, build your ideal station based on your disability and tell us what it looks like. So they did. And, and they were so excited about building this station, for them, and looking at their issue and turning it into a solution. So, so now people have something they can point to and say, we want this in our station. So it was just an hour-long workshop, but for 5 years, these people lobbied, the participants lobbied the city government, the mayor and the transit authority to build them a station. And today, they have a beautiful station that really, that really serves their community, and now they're really excited about that. But this is a way of really trying, when you use art making, this is a way to really get people to transform their ideas from just their head into realities. And when you build with your hands and objects, you have a tangible product. It's like Michelangelo, when he painted the Sistine Chapel, at the end of it, he had something to look at. The same thing with this process, that people have something they can look at and it's tangible, they can negotiate. That's why I think it's a lot more powerful when people use objects and build these objects, so then they can really start to go out there, fight for them. And for me, it's really, you really want to encourage self-determination amongst people that don't really necessarily have that kind of ideas about how to get power. But this way, you kind of build it up from their own memories and ideas. And I think so. Yeah, just come out of the workshop. So those.
And then one thing to add too is that when I interviewed some of the folks in this photo for this, and they said, the best thing about this is we have this level of independence now that we didn't have before. We used to have to have our parents drive us to the center, or we'd have to take 3 buses, or we'd have to do some sort of van pool ride sharing, use a ride sharing service. And now we can just hop on the train and we get to the station, and the station's designed in a way that's comfortable and inviting for us. And it's amazing.
Yeah, so that's it. Thank you very much. Open for questions. The gallery.
Thank you, James and John. That was great. Thank you. So we can open it up to, or we can take your questions. Anyone in the audience who wants to ask something of either James or John or both, this is the time for that. We'll open it up for Q&A. And just while we wait for some questions to come in, I had just a kind of an overarching question in reaction to what you were sharing, and that is, what do you think? I mean, you've had a lot of exchanges with researchers and psychologists, and I'm wondering what do you think that we as researchers could be doing to assist this kind of work more? What are the kinds of questions that you have that you think research could answer to further your work or further the impact of your work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, one thing that really comes to mind is how we measure outcomes in this engagement, and that's something that so we're writing a book. It's pretty much done, but earlier on, the editor was like, okay, I really want outcomes to be a big component of the book, but not just like, here's what we think the outcomes are, but like, how did you measure the outcomes, and what are the ways in which you can measure outcomes? And the challenge that we've found, and we've come up with a few different ways, but if you have tangible outcomes, so let's say it's like, it's a park, or it's a building, or it's something that you can point to and say, like, well, we did this engagement, and then now we have this park, and here are these elements of the park. Like at the end, with the station, like, here's this transit station, and here are these elements that really came out of these workshops. That is relatively straightforward. I don't know if it's completely straightforward, but relatively. But when it comes to the intangible outcomes, like more confidence in navigating the planning process? Do you feel more empowered? Do you feel like you have more connections with other people in your neighborhood? Those are the kinds of things that are harder, we've found, to measure. What we came up with was doing exit interviews with the participants. So I wanted to see if they had experienced some sort of change over the course of the engagement process. But what came up in the exit interviews, and we put this in the book because I think it's useful, is we were, by way of the exit interviews and by virtue of the exit interviews, engaging them through talking. And what we're always trying to do is move people away from just talking. And so what happened with a lot of the interviews is people got negative really quickly. So while they were very positive, say on the walking tour, which we did in South Colton, and that's a project that we talked about in our book, they might have had all these creative ideas. When we came back to them and asked them, okay, about their experiences with this and what did they think, yet they started to get really negative. So that was interesting, but also a challenge. So I think that for me, on the research side, looking into outcomes and how these methods can change outcomes and measuring those changes would be really valuable. Interesting.
Yeah, I think right now in the city planning profession and community engagement, it's all anecdotal. Nobody's doing research in this profession at all. People are just saying, well, if you have food at a meeting, people are going to come. Or if you have music, people are going to come. It's all very anecdotal. Nobody's really doing any kind of research at all in community engagement. People just know that it's not working, so they're trying all these different things to, we'll do face painting. Maybe that's going to work. Maybe we'll do things like this, and there's no research at all done in this whole realm of, between the city and people. I think that's where your profession can kind of come in and say, we're going to do research on community engagement. We're going to do studies, on how people communicate, on the built environment through memory and places with their hands in different ways of communicating. So I think that's really lacking, because right now it's just a big free for all. People are saying, well, do this, do that, and it doesn't really get anywhere. But I think since we've done 1,000 workshops with the same method 1,000 times, applied to different demographics, different situations, we kind of developed a technique. I think that's your profession would provide the city planning profession. It's how do you really start analyzing stuff in a really deeper, in-depth way.
Yeah, that's really interesting, James. I think too. I remember you saying, one of you saying during the presentation too, this striking difference you noticed between what people will put on a survey and what people will do when they're working with their hands in terms of so the way that you ask people to express their opinion, and even them knowing and having access to their opinion changes depending on the venue that you do that, or the I guess the means in which they're expressing.
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah, I think by having you study these kind of techniques, you can really validate them. Because people might say, well, this is just child's play. But if you study this as a profession and say, well, we've had research on this, it actually does work. This is why it works. This is why you should do it. I think people will listen. For us, it's hard for us to convince planners to use our method because they think it's just child's play, right?